Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by Deechworks Fuel Systems. Visit deechworks.com for all your fuel system needs. I'm your host, Con John Turk, and on this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we are going to cover multi-class racing and passing. Will I do multi-class racing and some passing? I figured I would reach out to someone with a little bit more experience than me. Star of the 2008 Speed Channel Hit Series setup, driver coach, Spec E30 national and regional champion, World Challenge, NASCAR, IMSA, and Pikes Peak racer, and someone who proved that old busted BMWs can take you places other than the grocery store, Mike Skeen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's quite the intro.
Oh, yeah, I try. I remember you from the NASA Mid-Atlantic paddock. So what have you been up to since then? I mean, I sort of hinted to some of it, but you've come a long way from your grassroots racing days. So,
yeah, that seems like forever ago. That racing was a blast, but I've been doing a lot of things since. Did a lot of World Challenge racing for many years, and Corvettes and Audis, GT3 cars, and some Grand Am before that turned into IMSA. And now the last couple of years, been racing an AMG GT3 in IMSA with Korthoff Preston Motorsports, full-time in the WeatherTech series, and doing some Trans Am TA2 racing also full-time and then part-time in the last couple of years because of schedule conflicts, and Pikes Peak and Baja, as you mentioned, some racing at the Nürburgring in the last couple of years. Just all over the place. Anything I can find a ride in, I'll do pretty much.
I mean, that's the dream for most of us, right? We want to drive, race, compete as much as we possibly can in the motorsports realm, and it seems like you've done it. So, kudos to you.
Yeah, been quite the ride for sure. But yeah, gotten a lot of cool opportunities, done a lot of cool racing, a lot of stuff that I can't even think of at the moment. But met a lot of great people, driven on cool stuff in cool places. It's been great.
Yeah, I feel like all of that seems like a grand adventure, right? Like you get to go to Pikes Peak, you could be in one car, you could go to the Nürburgring, be in a totally different car. It's, I'm jealous. Well, but proud because you came from the same places that we race right now. So awesome.
Yep.
So let's sort of dabble into this topic a little bit, and let's talk about what comprises a pass to you.
Obviously it comes in many different flavors, whether it's multi-class passing as you led into, or passing somebody within your own class. But, it's obviously an interaction with another car on track and trying to change positions, and something that you have to think through, whether that's a large, long planning period or something that happens really quickly. It takes all different forms and, requires different, mindsets for different types of passes and stuff. But in every pass, there's some level of like a gamble, and you got to play risk versus reward in your head and come up with the best possible solution to the math problem, I guess.
Yeah, there's a risk when you're the faster car overtaking a slower car. There's a risk when you're supposed to be in a slower car overtaking a faster car, in quotation marks. There's inherent risk when we're at the track in general, right? So we recently had an event with NASA Mid-Atlantic where some passing occurred here or there, interclass racing. It was the first time that I've ever had to race with the Thunder guys. So I'm in Honda Challenge, usually in Lightning. Car count was low. They put all of us in one group. So we had the closing speed of the GTS cars, okay, with the lightweight front wheel drive kids, the Spec Miatas, the I haven't, even when we did Beast of the East, which was supposed to get us more used to this interclass racing by racking us by time, I never got to race with those American Iron cars or the CMC guys, and those chassis do not behave like the rest of the chassis out there. Yes, they're rear-wheel drive, but they are different, right? So there's inherent risk. And there was some body contact with my car, big deal, whatever, it's part of racing. And there was definitely some gnarly passing going on. Gnarly stuff. So you talked about the mentality there's different mentalities that you need to have. Can we expand upon that? I mean, when you're let's talk faster car setting up to pass a slower car. What's going through your head?
Well, the first thing you got to kind of take in consideration is what type of event you're at. What's the, expectation of that either venue or, the rule set that you're racing to. Every place you race is a little bit different. And so you have to kind of understand both the written rule and kind of what the unwritten or expectation is of the other drivers, what their awareness level is. Is it a long endurance event where the drivers are changing out all the time? Or is this another driver that you've seen 3 laps ago because you're passing them every 3 laps? Or, so there's a lot of things that you take into consideration there. Whether that slower car is racing somebody else in their slower class and they're in a tight battle and you've got lots of horsepower and you can just get around them easily on the next straightaway. You don't always try to take the first opportunity to pass. I see it a lot in even track day groups where people will try to make point bypassing happen at inconvenient times just because it's the first possible opportunity to pass. But whether it's, a track day or a race organization, a lot of times it makes more sense to wait a half a second, let that slower car go through a corner and then take them down the straightaway following, either because it's safer or because the two of you are going to get through the corner faster nose to tail rather than side by side. So it's actually advantageous to you from a performance point of view, or whatever. So there are a lot of different scenarios that you have to play against, whether you're racing somebody in your own class really closely and you want to try to put a car between you and that other car in your class really quickly. Maybe you do take that slightly riskier entry to a corner pass to try to separate yourself a little bit and get yourself through a sector quickly and build a gap. There's a lot of different scenarios on that point of view, but you've got to also obviously consider the fact that that slower car is doing everything they can, even though they're going slower than you around a lap. They're at their limit and you can't put them out in the marbles where they can't deal with it. Or, you can kind of also judge the body language of the driver in front of you to get an idea of whether they see you for one. Are they leaving the door open? Are they starting to shut the door already? Are they just kind of in a weird position? And maybe, because they're not driving the best line, maybe they're not the best driver. There might be somebody that's less experienced and not quite as aware, and they're already driving over their head or at the limit. And they can't necessarily, take in enough information from the mirrors to know you're there. So there's some of the kind of reading into, what you see that might give you other hints of what's going on within that car you're trying to pass.
Oh, for sure. I know my mirrors were full. I'm not used to being in a class where other classes get to come past us. We're generally the fast or faster cars in Lightning. So when those Thunder cars are in there, I was hypersensitive to anything in my mirror, right? Now, that that combined with we had really tight racing within my group, right? So within my group, I think we were less than a second apart qualifying lap time wise. And we had all picked up pace, and normally it takes, say, 2.5 laps to get to the back of the Spec Miata field. Yeah, no, it was like 2 laps in, coming through turn 10 at Summit Point, ready to take the start lap 3. You can see the back end of the field. And so that mixed class racing when you're somewhere in the middle, oh man, it's a lot of work. It's the most work I've done behind the race car, like the wheel of a race car ever. It was exciting. It was fun, but it was a lot more work than when I'm like, okay, I don't really have to pay that much attention to my mirrors because there's nobody out here who should be passing me now, right? Mm-hmm. Say I outqualify somebody who's a little faster than me. Generally, I may have to watch until I either put a gap on them or they pass me. Okay. But outside of that, I don't normally have to watch. So, right. Yeah, it's different. It was an exciting time. You mentioned the rules, and I think the nuances to the rules, and you also mentioned the unwritten rules. So the written and the unwritten rules are... The written rules have a lot of different nuances between the two, right? So between NASA and GLTC, it's kind of big. Okay, so the grid life guys, if there's any overlap, you have to leave them room. In NASA, it's if their front bumper is at your door, right? So that's a big deal. Any overlap, if their front bumper is overlapping your rear bumper, you have to leave room. That's a big change, but generally that's not how it is. But those nuances are there, and you really have to know. And like you said, you probably have to realize, where is this racer typically racing? You know, maybe they're not normally in your group, maybe not normally in your organization. Maybe they are so stuck in their organization's ways that you may need to figure that out and figure out how they're driving and how they're behaving. But these unwritten rules, can you give us some examples of unwritten rules that are out there?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, there's certainly some where, in more pro racing levels where it's not as specific about when or how you have to give racing room. There's still obviously kind of an expectation of some amount of racing room, and that's a little bit gray and different to different people. And to some level or another, some contact is allowed in a lot of places beyond the club racing level. And so you have to know kind of what amount of contact is acceptable, how aggressive you can be, whether there's a good time to be racing somebody really good, really hard or not. So like yesterday I was in a Trans Am TA2 race. There's certainly more contact there than in most club racing. But also you have to kind of know when to use your cards and, when to race really hard. And sometimes in the middle of the race, you don't race somebody really hard. If you, say somebody's caught you really quickly, you don't have as good a car or whatever, maybe you race them really easy, you leave them big room, you let them go, whatever. And there might be kind of that expectation from the faster car to not get held up by somebody that's so, or a little bit slower than them in the middle of a race. Whereas maybe to the, you get to the last 10 minutes or something like that, even if you have a bit of a slower car, you're going to race that guy really hard just because, and you're trying to get everything you can at the last bit. So there's kind of just, some level of respect for another racer and when you give them more or less headache in how they get by you, or how aggressive you are in trying to get by them. But, I think there's also like, you go kind of the opposite end of the spectrum to like a vintage racing group, PCA or BMW CCA or some other place where you got a 13-13 type of rule set where, no contact at all whatsoever is allowed. And you got to leave a little bit extra racing room at all times. You're not going to send a dive bomb pass from, 2 car lengths, 3 car lengths back, whatever. You've got to be a little bit more respectful and just generally, leaving more margin on the table at all times. And so even if you make a successful pass in one of those environments, if it's like full ABS to the apex and they got to open the door and leave you room, like that's probably not the best scenario either. So that is maybe, not covered always by a written rule, but it is an expectation of the group you're racing with.
Yeah. And I think that brings us a little bit towards the conversation about passing etiquette. So, cause I think the etiquette is in that unwritten realm. So as the passing car, the car being passed, you need to be aware, you need to be predictable, those type of things. But so what in the etiquette realm, what do you see? If you're the car being passed, how should you perform?
I think if you're the car being passed, the biggest thing is kind of communicating when it is a good time to pass, or, if you're, it again depends on if it's an in-class situation or out of class. But if you're the car being passed in an out of class, situation, you're getting passed by a faster class car. You can do little things that kind of suggest you're going to leave the door open, even pointing, using a blinker. Lots of groups encourage those, if not enforce those kind of things also. And it makes it a lot more clear and takes a lot of the risk off the table for that faster class car, to be able to, make a pass with, a little bit more, ease of mind, to be able to, take a position without the risk. If you're in class, like I mentioned, sometimes in different parts of a race, if it's a longer race, especially, it's better for everybody if you make a pass that's less difficult. If somebody's caught you quickly, even if they're in your class, you can still give them a point by. I'm thinking of like a WRL race, an AER race, some kind of, longer event like that. It's not that big of a deal if, you're one of the slower guys in your car and the fast weapon is in the other fast car in your class or whatever. Like, let them go. It's not the time to race them if it's 6 hours to go or something. Maybe you're saving fuel. Maybe, there could be all sorts of scenarios where you're racing somebody in your class, but a faster car has caught you. And, it's a good idea to make it an easy pass, either by just physically moving and making a little bit of room, or pointing or using a blinker or something like that. I think the biggest thing that goes wrong with that scenario is when somebody tries to be helpful, but they think about it too late. And so they're trying to move aside to make room, but that other guy is, the car behind has already made a decision on which way they're going to go. And I see that a lot at, club racing endurance type events where, if I'm passing somebody and I've already got it planned out to where I'm going to try to go, and then they kind of move offline and try to make room. If you're going to be the one that's ahead opening the door for somebody, you have to be very proactive very early and make sure you're making that move before that other car has made that decision, especially at the closing speeds, any significant speed. But yeah, those are my kind of initial thoughts on that anyway.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned the blinker, and I don't know anything about any blinker use. So am I to assume that you're using the blinker to the side of the car you want them to go to?
So that, again, varies a little bit on where you are. For instance, at the Nürburgring, which I've been doing in the last couple of years, you would use the blinker just as you would on the street. So if you're going to move to the right, you use the right blinker, let them go to the left. And it's super helpful over there, because there's so many very big closing speeds on that racetrack in different cars, that sometimes you need to know well in advance before you could really even see a point by, especially if it's at night or something. But, if you're in that slower car, it's also more helpful for you to communicate to that faster car really early that I'm going to go over the right. I'm going to stay on the right down this straightaway or into this corner, whatever, and let you have the left side. And so it's a super helpful way of communicating. Usually in the States, I would say it's the opposite. So it becomes a little bit more ambiguous, and you have to also use kind of the body language of the car, if you will, like where you're placing the car to accentuate that, because there usually aren't clear rules for that over here. But since in a lot of the track day groups over here, and some people have learned that method, that the blinker is used kind of as a point by in a lot of those groups. A lot of those people that move from track days into club racing now, kind of maintain that behavior. And so usually in the US, if you're using a blinker, it's like a point by, you point to the right or blink to the right for that car to pass you on the right.
Leave it to us to be backwards. So, okay. All right. So, can we talk about we've hinted at some, right? Like dive bombing or whatever, but what's a typical or some typical racing passes? Because we hear the over-under move sometimes. Can we explain some of those basic passes to people?
Yeah, so the over under pass, typically into a tighter, slower corner, where the line can kind of vary a little bit, where somebody makes a maybe over ambitious outbraking maneuver, and they might get position well up alongside the car they're passing, maybe overshooting the corner a little bit, and that car that's being passed can kind of take an over exaggerated late turn in and get a good run off of the corner and then pass that car on the way out. You can also use that as a kind of a technique to bait somebody that, if the car in front goes defensive and you're trying to pass them, you can maybe brake really deep on the outside of the braking zone, make that car, brake at the same level as you, but because they're in towards the middle of the braking, that makes them overshoot a little bit and you can get a better run out of the corner. So it work both ways, sort of, if you will, as a method of passing or maybe a poorly executed pass attempt. But it's kind of a method of overshooting or changing where the emphasis is on, getting a better way out of the corner or way into the corner. And so kind of the proper way maybe to execute that pass or to execute a late braking maneuver without having a repass from an over under would be to really slow it on the apex and basically block that car that's trying to get the under portion done, where they're trying to get that late apex done. You kind of block them enough that they can't get under you early enough to get to power and get a better exit from the corner. There's certainly the dive bomb that, we mentioned a little bit earlier about having a real late, full commitment, full ABS, kind of way too late into the corner from too far back. So that's somebody that's like trying to outbrake you, but they haven't done enough work to get into position before the outbraking maneuver begins. And I see this a lot, and you see it a lot on TV with kind of more amateur pro series or whatever, with more poorly executed braking maneuvers where somebody's kind of full send. There's no option but for that car that's trying to, that's being passed to just leave the door open, or there's contact, and you see it a lot now, especially with ABS cars, because it makes, it gives you a lot of courage having the ABS to brake really deep and go, full send, if you will. And so it leaves that, it kind of puts that bait out there for somebody that's behind and trying to make a pass attempt to go for that super late pass. An outbraking maneuver, which doesn't always work out if either the car in front doesn't see that move happening or thinks that, they have some right to the corner because that rearward car wasn't alongside enough on the way in or whatever. Lots of pass attempts come out poorly in that way, but unfortunately.
I actually see this a lot in NASCAR when they're at the road courses, because I think they think they're close enough, but they're not, and they've been in the cars for so long that they just try, and then I don't think they actually have ABS. Maybe they have ABS in the new car. I don't know, but it looks like they lock up, and then they're hosed once they lock them up. So I see that they're like half a car, full car length, one car length too far away to pull this move off, but they're trying, and there's always contact. So
it's tough in a NASCAR because the cars are so heavy and they're so fast that the brake zones are really, really long. And even if you are braking at the same point, if something about that braking performance is not quite right and you can't slow yourself quite as much as the other car, you can get yourself into no man's land where you just can't pull back enough and, get back out of that, look, where, maybe you're just having to look inside or whatever, and that other car slows up at a more rapid rate than you do. They're super tricky cars to drive on the brakes. And they change more over the course of a race than a lot of GT cars or prototype cars or something like that. So it can get to a point where you just don't have the capability to slow the car as well as another competitor. But, yeah, it's certainly a tricky situation and something that can get you into, no man's land, like I said, where you have no option but to hope the other guy leaves the door open or there's going to be contact and somebody's going to come out on the fore end of that. But one thing that reminds me of is, way back in going to racing school and learning all this stuff I was taught that the process, at least if you're racing somebody in your class, is you got to be able to do something better than that other guy to even have a thought that you can pass them. And so I think that's part of what's missing now. People that maybe don't do enough schooling or on the way up or whatever. There's people that get into racing with not enough experience or not enough people giving them, this process, but they get behind somebody that they're faster than, but they don't figure out the process of planning a pass and how to get themselves in position to make a legitimate pass. And so they just send it, at some point and think, okay, I'll outbreak him and I'll get position up next to him. But really it starts long before the break zone wherever you're trying to make that pass. You got to do something better than them at the beginning of the straightaway, getting a better run, getting up next to them, before the break zone even starts. You should at least have a tiny bit of overlap or, be your front bumper to their rear bumper kind of thing and make up the rest under braking. Whether that's, based on rules of the organization you're with or whatever, even if there's no rules, really you have to be able to be basically bumper to bumper with somebody to be, even have an opportunity to outbrake an even car. And so to make up that kind of half distance overlap or whatever to get some position before the turn in point, if you can just get your front bumper to their rear bumper before the brake zone and then wait for them to brake, that little reaction time will move you up that half car length to get next to them. Of course, you have to kind of have in mind also your point of no return braking point, the last possible point you can be. So if they go too deep for themselves, you don't go too deep. Maybe you make them just overshoot the corner, but you have to do something before you even get to that pass opportunity to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? So that part is trying to figure out the setup. So where can you pull this trigger and what do you have to do before you pull that trigger? How close do you have to be? The last weekend's racing was crazy for me, right? So, it was basically 3 or 4 Honda Challenge cars. We were all racing nose to tail, and there were 2 CMC cars in front of us. And they were racing real well for about half, maybe a little over half of the race, and then they started to separate. The trick was we were so much faster in certain areas, but down the straightaway, getting into turn 1, there was no way we were going to get around those guys, and the way their chassis like throw themselves around under braking, we did at one point. We went 3 wide, 1 CMC to the left, me in the middle, and then the guy that was racing me, Michael Young, went all the way to the inside, and he was shielded from this Mustang that's just like swaying. I swear the only way they make turn 1 at Summit Point is they like time the sway of the rear end of their cars and then they pitch it in, right? Mm-hmm. He was swaying so violently, I just jacked the brakes as much as I could and let everybody pass me because I was not there to be hit, right?
Yeah.
So, but the whole race I was trying to figure out, how can I get this guy in between me and the people behind me just to create that space? Because I knew if I could get in front of him, I could make the run through, the carousel at Summit Point. We're basically even going up the hill. They were a little faster. The CMC cars were basically faster, a little faster going up the hill, a little faster on the straightaway, but they were slow in turn 10. So I knew there were some spots if I could make it stick again in turn 1 and get that car in between me, I was golden. But all the areas I was way faster than that car, I could not, there was no point I could then execute a pass, right? So
Yeah.
it was just a challenge. It was a great mental challenge for me to try to figure that out. But that's a big part of passing, is trying to figure out where you're better than the other car, whether it's in your class or out of your class, where you're better, and then where can you take advantage. And I just had no place to take advantage. It was wild. So
Yeah. And, I can think of many times where, like in an endurance race, you can have a battle with the same car or a couple of cars for an hour. And, you may have strengths and weaknesses in different places on a racetrack. And you have to figure out a way to make the pass happen in your area of the racetrack so that you can get away before you get back to their area, like maybe at a Daytona or something like that. If you've got a car that's not quite as fast in a straight line, but you can get through the infield really well, you need to be able to make a pass in turn 1 or 3 so that you can get away enough in the slower portions of the racetrack before you get back out onto the banking and get run over again. So just about any racetrack there you can have that environment, even if it's a class, a car within your class, but a different model maybe, or whatever, that maybe just has strengths in different places. You got to be able to, or even if it's the same car, but a driver that's better in a certain area versus another, you got to be able to make that pass in the right area of the racetrack, or you just get repassed immediately. And so, that chess match is what makes this all a lot of fun. And, especially when you can have somebody that's, gives you enough respect that you can have that back and forth and not just be, somebody sending a Hail Mary and try not to run you off the road or whatever. That's when it becomes much more rewarding.
yeah, and you've mentioned this a couple of times now, respecting the other driver. It doesn't matter in your class, out of your class, we're all sharing the track, and we need to respect each other. And just because you may be faster than them around the course doesn't mean they don't deserve your respect and your hardware, their hardware, everybody. We're squishy too. Accidents occur. We just need to respect each other when we're going to go play out there and do this chess match. And sometimes I think we red mist a little bit too much. It's not a hate. It's just a less caring than we need to, or less strategic than we need to be. It comes down to respecting each other and where we are. So I think that's a big takeaway for me anyway.
And I think, that goes even beyond that off the racetrack, yes, everybody makes mistakes. And some of the best relationships I've had with other drivers over the years are the guys that we got into it on a racetrack, and then we went to each other and talked like human beings after the fact, and that respect built, and we had better battles on, in other races past that. But, if you don't go address that person after the fact, say, hey, I'm sorry I screwed that up, or try to get their perspective if you don't see eye to eye on it or whatever, a lot of times that can fester and just create bigger problems on the racetrack down the road. So I think that's an important aspect of that whole, scenario too, is there's going to be mistakes and people are going to screw up and get over their head, have that red mist, whatever. It happened to me just yesterday in the TA2 race. I got hit by somebody that was in the pole sitting car and dropped way back early in the race and was coming back through when we had some motor problems, and he got in too deep and hit me. And, he came to me after the race and said something. So, that was a good thing. And I have more respect for that driver because of it. And it happens all the time. And I think that's an important aspect for people to remember and keep in mind, that there, all these race cars have human beings in them, at least at this point in time. And, you got to treat that human the way you want to be treated.
Absolutely. I think that can now be our best practice. We haven't even got into best practices, but I think that's definitely the best one out there. The best practice for this is to respect each other on and off the track, because for passing, you have to respect each other, and you have to be cognizant of that person to person interaction on the track, off the track. I think that's super important. Do you have other best practices that we can talk about? I have some written down, so I believe I stole them from several websites, and I felt like some of them were pretty much comedic value, but maybe we'll see if you run out or we don't cover them, how you feel about the actual punchline that they're using. So any additional best practices?
So a couple best practices that I will say based on what I see as poor practices by a lot of people when they're first starting out. One is present yourself well. So if this is especially if you've caught somebody quickly and you're trying to get around them, present yourself directly behind that car first before you pull out a line. I see a lot of faster class cars, that will catch somebody down the straightaway or maybe there's 2 or 3 fast cars coming up on a slower car. All those cars may just stay in a line off to the side of that slower car. And it's hard for that slow car to see you in the mirrors. If you one by one kind of get behind that car before you pull out to go around, it makes it a lot easier for that slower car to see in the center mirror. Okay, there's one more, he's going. So present yourself directly behind the car you're passing before you go to pass is one. Then when you do make a maneuver to go to pass somebody, particularly in a brake zone, don't leave way too much room between you and that other car. Some people feel they need to go way off to the inside in order to leave that car a lot of space, but it's actually much more dangerous the more space you leave that car. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, but it's a communication thing. If you're right up next, you can leave them a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, whatever, but don't leave more than a car width to that car, or even more than half a car width, I would usually say. You don't need to squeeze them off the track or whatever, but you want to be close enough to that car you're passing that they can see and hear you. They can see you in their side mirror, to the point where then you get enough overlap. They can see you out the side window. If you're way off to the outside, way off to the inside, with several car widths between you, there's a much bigger blind spot in that mirror before you get far enough up alongside they can see you in the side. It's also easier for them to hear you, depending on the volume of the 2 different cars. But and lastly, it also gives you a performance benefit in that you're holding them in position on line under braking until you're ready to turn in. If you're way off to the inside, they can start that turn in and get several, feet across the track until the point where they might make contact with you and you're at very different, trajectories, because they've already started turning a lot more than you have because you're way off to the inside. So by staying up right next to that car until you both get down near the turn in, you hold them in position off, on the braking, lane, if you will, until you start to turn in, and then they can kind of fall in behind you. And so it makes much more, direct communication with that other car and kind of forces their hand to stay where they are until you're ready to turn in.
Yeah. That as a best practice, it really helps you, the overtaking driver, inner class, outer class, whatever. It helps you control the corner. So, another thing, like you said, when you're way too far on the inside, it's a detriment to your corner speed, right? So yeah, you're going to get them under the brakes, but you're not going to create that gap because you're not going to be pitched through the corner. But it also, that communication, when you get closer, when you don't give them gobs and gobs of room, but you give them a respectable amount of room, then that becomes, okay, now I'm braking, they'll brake, you'll brake likely, but you guys will have that overlap. They'll know when you're turning in so they can turn in behind you. That you're controlling their turn in point when you give them, when you let them see that and when you give them that space or lack of space. So, yeah. So do you have any other best practices for us?
The other one that I would say is what we talked about earlier is the setup portion. Make sure that, even if you're in a much faster car, you're catching somebody very quickly, there should be a plan in mind and kind of a setup and something in your mind that you're doing. But especially in a, class to class pass, there should be something that you've done better than that other car to make that pass happen, rather than just oh, that car's in front of me. I'm going to, full send on the brakes and hope we make a spot here. There should be something that develops this pass, that's a process and not just a show up and try to take a position.
For sure. So there's one on my list. It's it's got to be a joke, but it says assume the other drivers are incompetent as a best practice for passing. And I think it's a little disrespectful, but it's also not in the right frame, because we talked about respecting each other as drivers and all that. We need to assume that, especially if you're in a slower car overtaking a faster car, they probably have a problem, right? So now you need to be aware. It's not that they're incompetent. There might be a problem with that car, right? Mm-hmm. So to be situationally aware doesn't mean you assume they're incompetent, but you need to be extraordinarily aware when you're about to go into whatever turn it is, 1, 3, 10, wherever you are making that pass, how that person is performing and why are they not on pace, right? So they could not be on pace. They could be a slower car than you, but they're really off pace, right? The situational awareness that you need to have and you need to be ready for is big. So
yeah, or it could even be they're in a faster car but going slower. Like you said, they have a problem. It could be they're very busy looking at the dash, trying to figure out what's wrong with the car, or listening for a noise or a vibration, and they're preoccupied, so they don't aren't giving as much attention to the mirrors as they should. But yeah, maybe not think of everybody as incompetent, but assume that you haven't been seen unless you have put yourself in a position where for sure they see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you're getting up alongside. Yeah.
All right. The other best practice that it says in here: when in doubt, stay in your lane. I get it. If it's questionably close, if the driver's not necessarily being predictable, maybe you don't pull that trigger the first time around. That could be it's situationally dependent, right? So when in doubt, just give it another corner or two. Give it the next opportunity, not the first one. And I think that'll help club racers and specifically stay out of trouble bending metal. So
kind of along those lines, one of the things that I heard Randy Popes always say was, don't hit what you can see. And that in itself puts a lot of the responsibility on the passing driver, right? You got to assume that you have a much better view of what's going on as the car behind than the car in front does. Even with the best mirrors and situational awareness, you're not going to see as clear of a picture of what's going on behind you as the car behind will see of the situation in front. So you have, even if you've done everything right as the passing car to get in the right position and everything, you got to assume the other guy doesn't see as well. So don't hit what you can see.
For sure. But that's it. I don't think I've read a set of club rules that doesn't say the heavy onus, the responsibility of the pass is on the passing car. It doesn't matter slower, faster, or whatever. If you're executing the pass, that pass is on you. So just because there's room doesn't mean you're going to make it, right? So Be aware, be ready. And like you said, you had to go, or somebody came and talked to you. Last race weekend, I went to go talk to somebody else. We were raging up turn 9, going under the bridge. I check my mirror. I see nobody. I go to bend the car in at Summit Point for turn 10, and there's one of the GTS cars, a BMW, like on Hoosiers right there. And I was like, oop, I'm not going to keep turning down. I'm going to give him his space until he backs out. I had to check up in the middle of turn 10, which is always interesting. But, the closing speed was crazy. But at the end, I was like, hey, man, I'm not used to it. I'm sorry. I saw you at the last minute, and I wanted to be sure that, you were cool. He goes, yeah, man, we're fine. No big deal. At least you saw me. So
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, always being that aware is important. So,
Yeah.
Any other best practices?
That's all I can think of at the moment.
All right. So, my last little question from our high level outline. Your thoughts on using sim racing to learn passing racecraft?
I think it has a reasonable place. Certainly it's a little bit different. Real world versus sim world because there's fewer consequences in the sim world. But yeah, I think as long as you are in a race simulation where the other people involved are at a reasonable level, like on iRacing, that you're in a advanced enough group or whatever that people are racing with respect and racing as you would expect to kind of see it happen in the real world. Yeah, it's a good place to try things and learn how things work and figure out how to time and over under move, or how to set up a pass. Like we've been talking about, it certainly has its place. It's like I said, it's always going to be a little bit different when real people's safety and money is on the line. But yeah, it's certainly better to have that experience than none. So I think it's valuable for sure.
Yeah, you're right. The environment in sim racing is likely going to be a lot different outside because of that, low consequence, right? What's the worst you're going to do? Break a pedal box or whatever when you're jamming on the brakes too hard. Okay. There's no bent metal. There's bent pixels when you're sim racing. But at the same time, it gives you, like you said, assuming you can find a quality enough lobby environment, whatever software you're using, as long as you can find a quality area, I believe it will be a great spot to get the repetition and exposure for overtaking, being overtaken. I mean, they do the 24 hours of whatever. Almost all of the big endurance races are now done in sim lobbies, right? So
Right.
You can get tons and tons of seat time, especially if you get all your friends together, right? And then do those types of races where you can get tons and tons of exposure to being passed, trying to pass people, trying to figure things out. My uncle likes
I think
to...
the biggest... Go ahead.
My uncle likes to say experience is expensive, but I feel like the investment in a sim, which I don't own yet, but the investment in a sim can actually... I mean, I feel it's like one of the main reasons I want one is to get more exposure to how to set somebody up, how to deal with faster traffic, how to deal with slower traffic. Like I just feel like it's invaluable, and it won't be that expensive.
Yeah, it is a great tool, and it also helps with the mindset of running a race distance and running longer race distances. There's a lot of people that start out in shorter club races where you run 20, 30 minutes. And then if you go to an hour-long enduro or a 45-minute race or beyond that to a WRL kind of stint length, it gets a lot difficult just to have a clear mindset throughout, anything longer than your normal duration of 20 to 30 minutes. And so, if you start doing sims at that length and doing longer stints, it gets you a little bit more used to just the process of being, that focused for that long of a period of time, and how to be that consistent and set up a pass on somebody over a long course of time or whatever. It helps you get into that frame of reference and extend your experience, just like you said, in a more equitable way.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's probably going to do it. But where can people reach out to you?
The easiest thing is just go to my website, mikeskeen.com, and shoot over an email from there. But yeah, I get lots of messages on YouTube or Instagram. Also, everything is at Mike Skeen Racing. And also, while I'm thinking about it, like the YouTube channel is a really good place, whether it's mine or somebody else's. Just go watch lots of onboard. That's one way I learned a lot, was just watching, high level pro on board and figuring out, what they were doing and try to emulate that, and you can kind of see somebody's thought process and setting up pass maneuvers and stuff like that, and watching and also seeing what not to do, either what other cars they're passing, doing the wrong thing to get out of the way or whatever. But all that visual experience is experience, whether you're driving the car or not. You see what's good and bad.
Oh, absolutely. I've watched a lot of your videos. I won't say most. Usually you have a decent amount of videos up there, but you just let the in-car camera roll. It is a good experience. You can actually watch a video, assuming you don't know from the title of the video that somebody crashed out, or maybe it's in one of the endurance videos where you don't know the results and they crashed out, but then got put back together and back out there, whatever. But you can actually see where you're like, oh, that doesn't look like a good idea. Why are they poking their nose here? Or maybe it is. Maybe you're totally wrong. Maybe you feel that it's a poor place to be and they execute well. So if it was a poor place to be, but they still executed it well, how did they do that? I rewind YouTube videos all the time and go, what was that? How did they do that? Like, yeah, that's a great tool also. So,
yeah.
All right, Mike. Well, I really appreciate coming on the podcast, sir.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.